Hi, everyone, and welcome to this year's webinar on new CalFresh legislation recently signed into law and to be implemented in 2019. A little background on the Alliance to Transform CalFresh. We work to raise the rate of CalFresh participation overall and with no county below 70% over the next few years. And we focus on 4 data-driven strategies that include same-day service, reducing churn, dual enrollment, and equitable access for all. The legislation we're talking about today will impact all of our goals, and we are excited to see these important changes valued in our legislature and look forward to ensuring they're properly implemented in 2019, except for one particular piece of policy that we do not want to see implemented. So I will let our presenters talk about that. And for now, I'm going to hand it over to Becky Gershon, who is the CAP manager for the California Association of Food Banks.
Good morning, everybody. So before we go any further, just a couple of logistical items that we wanted to touch on. First of all, yes, the webinar will be recorded. We will be posting it on the ATC website, and we will be following up with an email with the link. So if you have colleagues that weren't able to join the call this morning, you can share that link with them, and you can look back on it later if you want a refresher. Also, please ask questions. Use the bar on the right of your screen under questions to type in questions as you're listening to the presenters. And we will be monitoring those questions that come in, and we'll have a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. Before we go further, we just wanted to get a sense of who has joined us today. So I'm going to go ahead and start a poll. And please go ahead and answer. Great. So thanks for answering. It looks like most of you are with us as CalFresh advocates or assisters, and a few of you who are county CalFresh administrators and from CDSS. So thanks to all of you for joining us today. On today's presentation, we will have Jessica Bartholow from the Western Center on Law and Poverty, Tracey Paterson from the California Food Policy Advocates, and Andrew Cheyne from the California Association of Food Banks. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce today's agenda, which you probably have already seen. There'll be 3 bills that'll be discussed, as well as a few budget items and big policy changes, plus potential federal policy change that could impact CalFresh next year. So with that, I will hand it off to Jess.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you can hear me just fine. This is Jess Bartholow with the Western Center on Law and Poverty, and I'll be going over 3 areas of legislation. First, I want to talk about the CalFresh Employment and Training Program. California has spent years together as legislators, as program administrators at the county and state level, and with advocates to help expand the reach of the CalFresh Employment and Training Program, make it more accountable to its goals of helping people achieve self-sufficient employment and overcome barriers to employment, and expanding the program to make sure that more Californians who are on CalFresh have access to CalFresh Employment and Training, and all doing this while not sanctioning people's benefits as a result of non-participation. So I just can't say how proud I am of the administrators that are working night and day to help make sure this program is what it is today. This year there was a small bill, but a helpful one, Assembly Bill 1892. This is Assemblymember Joan Sawyer, and what it does is just extends it clarifies some law to extend the CalFresh employment and training programs to a broader group of CalFresh recipients, and it also clarifies rules for reimbursement on broadband expenses. As anyone who's helping low-income people into the job market knows, access to phone and to broadband is essential these days. There are many jobs that people cannot apply for unless they have access to broadband and can apply online, and the same with their phone services. So AB 1892 clarifies that indeed these services can be supported in part by employment and training program funds to make sure that people, when they are in the job search component of the employment and training programs, don't miss the opportunity to become employed due to lack of broadband or phone service. Additionally, so people should look out for guidance coming from the California Department of Social Services from that. If you want to know more about California's CalFresh Employment and Training Program, you can go to a website. I included here in the slide that CDSS has posted. It has copies of all the CalFresh Employment and Training plans and webinars and materials and information about what's happening in each county. Next slide, please. And just to kind of give you a sense of the kinds of things you can see there on the CalFresh Employment and Training website of CDSS, I pulled out one of my favorites, which shows what I mentioned at the beginning, which is that CalFresh Employment and Training is being made available to more and more CalFresh recipients in more and more counties. As you can see that the upcoming plan is anticipated to serve over 100,000 individuals in the state of California, and to do so with more quality programs, including expansion into the community colleges with the Fresh Success program. So just a little pitch for you to go onto the CDSS website and learn more about ENT as we move into a period in time in which the ABOD waivers are expiring. ENT will become increasingly important, not only to help people overcome barriers to employment, but also to keep them connected to CalFresh. Next slide, please. Moving on to college student hunger. Anyone who is working on CalFresh in California knows how much energy there is around trying to address some of the really troubling research that has come out about the crisis of college student hunger, and how hunger, something so simple to resolve, has undermined people's ability to study and even for some to stay in college. I always say that if a low-income person has made it to college, they've only done so after a great deal of struggle and triumph, and we shouldn't let something as little as hunger undermine their success. So here I do have a summary that I want to make sure people have access to about the kind of the broad kind of multi-year effort that has been pursued in partnership with college students, with the faculty, with leaders in the UC, CSU, and community college systems, and that first URL offers you a kind of history of where we're at up until this year. We also have a couple of successes to celebrate this year. One was being able to extend funding for what's called the Hunger Free College Campus Initiative. This was funded for the first time in last year's budget. It was a one-year only investment. It helped the college campuses to either establish or expand emergency food distributions on campus, to either establish or expand a food swipe or a food sharing program at their college eateries. And it also allowed colleges to pursue restaurant meal programs if they reside in a county that has a restaurant meal program. Just as a reminder, the restaurant meal program is a program that serves people who are elderly, disabled, or who are homeless and receive CalFresh. In the counties that participate, it allows them to purchase hot or prepared food, whereas the regular EBT distribution or EBT card doesn't allow you to do that. So the Hunger Free Campus College Campus Initiative was again funded this year with expanded resources for the community colleges, unfortunately with fewer resources for the UC and the CSU programs. And the good news is that people are putting their heads down and trying to figure out how to move forward into next year and restore some of the funding that was cut in the program for a third year of funding, and possibly to request that it be made permanent. The next victory this year in college student hunger was AB 1894 by Dr. Shirley Weber. As people know, she's been leading a lot in this space of college campus climate, making sure that our campuses are welcoming to all people in California who come into the colleges, regardless of their income, regardless of their race, and other things that may make them feel unwelcome on campus. And through this work, Dr. Weber has been working on CalFresh and EBT access on campuses. This year's bill, what it does is it expands the ability for to all CSUs, regardless of which county they're in, to participate in the restaurant meal program. As I said before, we have been expanding the program onto college campuses within the counties that choose to participate. What AB 1894 is, it allows the CSU Chancellor's Office to roll up into a single MOU with their college campus cafeterias, so that each college campus in the CSU program can have a restaurant meal program, regardless of which county they're in. And then finally, while it wasn't a successful through passage, it was a successful first year in dialogue in the state legislature, SB 1275 by Senator Stern. This bill was the first ever proposed plan to end college hunger, which would have offered a meal plan for all low-income college recipient or college students who receive a certain Cal grant. We got through a really successful policy committee, but it didn't get out of appropriations. It is quite expensive, but it would help us to significantly close the hunger gap for college students. So look for that bill again next year. Great. And finally, modernization, CalFresh modernization. With more and more modern ways for communication, the CalFresh program managers and the CalFresh recipients themselves are eager to utilize them. There have been a number of counties that have started using text messages, and Assemblymember Berman's 1957, AB 1957, helps to codify the practice of text messaging as a form of communication with CalFresh recipients. We've seen in Santa Clara County some first efforts at text messaging reduces churn, have shown to reduce churn tremendously. And remember, churn is how often somebody who's eligible falls out of the program due to kind of bureaucratic hurdles and then comes back into the program. So kind of duplicating the work of both the eligibility workers, but also of the burden to the CalFresh applicant themselves. So AB 1957 simply just establishes that counties are able to do this and directs the Department of Social Services to issue guidance on how to communicate via text message to recipients with some minor, with some specific protections within the law itself. For more information about modernization, the Alliance to Transform CalFresh has a report that might be helpful, probably a couple of them. And so I put the link up here to the Alliance to Transform CalFresh websites, and you can see some of the reports that we have there with regards to modernization. And with that, we go to the last slide. I just want to make sure you have access to our resources. We have an end of session summary. And if you don't know, throughout the year, the legislative session, we publish every 2 to 3 weeks an update of the human services and access to justice legislation, the status of the legislation, a brief summary of the legislation, and links to the legislation. And if you go to our website at wclp.org, you can find those that list and the most updated version of that list on our legislative tools button. So here's a link to the last one for the last legislative session. And we also did a 2-year wrap-up. Since the legislative sessions are 2 years in full, we did a 2-year wrap-up of just CalFresh laws, new CalFresh laws to look out for. And of course, you can always email me at my email address below. Thank you, everyone who was part of these legislative victories and will be part of our legislative campaign next year. I appreciate working with all of you. Thanks.
Hi. Okay, moving on to some additional CalFresh legislation. This is Tracey Paterson. I'm with California Food Policy Advocates, and I'm going to talk a bit about the California Fruit and Vegetable EBT pilot. So if folks were tracking legislation in the spring, you may recognize this as SB 900. But the text from SB 900 was incorporated into the trailer bill of AB 1811, along with $9 million of funding. We're very excited about this. There was a coalition of over 30 organizations supporting the California Fruit and Vegetable EBT pilot, and so we were thrilled to see both the policy and the funding become approved by the legislature in this year. So many of you may be familiar with some existing fruit and vegetable supplemental programs such as Market Match, which operates at over 300 farmers markets throughout California. There's also a program called Double Up Food Bucks that provides a similar dollar-for-dollar match for California fruits and vegetables in grocery stores in Santa Clara County. There are additional grocery store-based programs in Yolo County, the Yolo County Double Up Bucks, and as well in Orange, Los Angeles, and San Diego at the Northgate Gonzales Market, Mas Fresco. So all of these programs are quite successful, very beloved in the communities where they're at. But one of the problems is that it can be difficult to scale up across the state. They are administratively a pretty heavy lift for local entities to maintain in terms of not just the promotion and the marketing and the outreach, but also doing the accounting on site with different vouchers and coupons and tokens at different sites. And so what the California Fruit and Vegetable EBT pilot does is take those concepts of supplemental, sometimes called nutrition incentive programs, and incorporate the accounting right into the EBT system so that shoppers, a CalFresh shopper, could go into a participating pilot retailer, and this could be a grocery store or a farmer's market. The pilot requires a mix of both to ensure that both farmer's market and grocery locations are tested in this pilot. And a CalFresh shopper could ring up all of their groceries. Any California grown fruits or vegetables that they purchase would get a dollar-for-dollar rebate. So right back onto the card, you would get a CalFresh benefit that could be used on any food product. There would be a monthly cap that hasn't been determined what the cap will be. It would likely be somewhere between $30 and $80 a month for the household. And it should really increase the purchasing power of CalFresh shoppers to be able to help make benefits last throughout the month and to support the purchase of California fruits and vegetables because we know that fresh produce can be among the most difficult to afford and also to stretch out through the month because of freshness, wanting to keep those products fresh. So what this pilot will do, we'll have CDSS work with stakeholders to modify the EBT system so that it can allow for supplemental benefits to be accrued and redeemed right on EBT without the need for any additional coupons. Like I said, it will provide that dollar-for-dollar match for California grown fruits and vegetables. And it will pilot test this new system at 3 to 7 retailers throughout the state. This is going to be done through an RFP process, so there are no pre-selected sites. That's one question that we've gotten a lot is sort of what are the sites going to be, where is it going to be, and that will be determined in the next year. the next steps is that CDSS will be convening stakeholders to work on developing both the EBT system mechanism so that it is really usable by retailers and community organizations and sort of closely matches what exists now so that people don't have to redesign their local programs. And then an RFP should be issued next year. So if this is something that you are interested in bringing to your community or hoping that your community could host a pilot site, keep an eye out. We will be letting folks know when that RFP becomes available. So you can look on our website at cfpa.net. You can also definitely look for CDSS's notices as well to come out. And like I said, we should expect this to be designed in the next year, and we hope that the pilot will become live either in the end of 2019 or 2020. I think that's it. So I'm going to switch tacks here for a little. It's hard to talk about CalFresh right now without discussing public charge. So I want to be clear that this is not state legislation. The theme of the rest of the webinar is state legislation that has passed. This is not in any way state legislation, nor is it federal legislation that has passed. There is a notice of proposed rulemaking through the Department of Homeland Security. So I'm going to go briefly both through what this means, what you can do to help, particularly if you work with immigrant families, and then also what we can do to fight back against this regulation, because like I said, it is a proposed change right now, and we still have time to stop it from becoming enacted as a permanent rule. So just to give a little bit of background, public charge has been part of our federal immigration law for over 100 years, and it's a test. It has been, inherently sort of xenophobic and classist just in the fact that it exists as a test to identify people who may become dependent on the government as their main source of support in the future. So this is for people who are applying for lawful permanent residence or a green card, or to sponsor family members to be reunified with them in the United States. So this is really looking at benefits that lawfully present immigrants are legally entitled to. This is not pertaining to undocumented immigrants. The public charge rule right now only pertains to cash assistance, such as CalWorks or SSI, and government-funded long-term institutional care, and it has traditionally been for people who would be primarily dependent on the government. What this proposed rule would change, it would be a complete transformation of the way that we even define public charge, and it would count the use of any programs like CalFresh, Medi-Cal, or Section 8 vouchers as something that would trigger a public charge test and would be a heavily negative factor for immigrants who are seeking to remain in the country with a green card. And so if this rule is finalized in its proposed form, it would severely restrict and stigmatize healthcare and nutrition help that helps families thrive and remain productive. And I think it's important to recognize that while it is a relatively smaller group of immigrants to whom this pertains, the chilling factor would be enormous. And I think many people feel like this rule was designed to be intentionally confusing so that it would cause others to fear the use of benefits that they're legally entitled to use for their family. So as I said, this would have a negative impact on Medi-Cal. It would have a negative impact on CalFresh. It also includes prescription drug costs that are subsidized under Medicare Part D and Section 8 and public housing. So it's important to know that if you are working with immigrant families, that many immigrant groups are not subject to public charge. It's going to be really essential that we get accurate information out to people so that they can determine whether they are at risk as they're looking forward to this rule, but also to remember that this is not a current rule. So if people are considering disenrolling, to remember that no benefits that are used right now can be counted as a risk against themselves until after this becomes a final rule and for a good period of time after. That doesn't mean that people will not have fears or that their fears about sponsoring family members are not real, because they are at this point because of some changes to sponsoring people who are currently living abroad. Under the proposed rule, the receipt of benefits is by the individual, not family members. So if children or others are receiving benefits and a parent is applying for a green card, the use of their children's benefits would not be counted. And finally, as I said, this is only a proposal. The rules governing public charge in the U.S. have not yet changed, and every individual family's situation is different. So it's important that we can direct people to legal assistance as well. Next slide, please. So as I said, this is not final, and so we are really working with others to fight back. If you have not yet joined as an organization or gone to look as an individual at the Protecting Immigrant Families Coalition website, I highly suggest you go to that website, protectingimmigrantfamilies.org. There's a wealth of resources and information there, as well as a portal to where you can directly submit public comments to the Department of Homeland Security. We also do have a portal for California comments. The link right there, bit.ly/CA comments, and public comments are due by December 10th. I do want to note that there are restrictions on the use of federal CalFresh funds to do advocacy, and that includes commenting on the proposed public charge rule. So if you are using federal CalFresh funds for your outreach or your program, make sure that you as an individual are commenting as a private citizen. You entirely have a right to do so, your personal perspective, your own computer, on your own time, and it definitely does not prohibit others in your organization who are not federally funded from commenting. So it's important to educate immigrant families so that they know what is going on, and also, can assess their own situation, and then also to make sure that we're talking to policymakers to urge them to oppose the changes. And finally, that we can document the harm and identify the chilling effect that this would have, not just on individual families, but on entire communities. This is really an attack as well on retailers, the food system, everyone who is dependent, the healthcare system. If you think about going into flu season, even with the fact that people would be nervous to go to the doctor and get preventative care, this is going to impact all of us. So please stay tuned and make sure that you are working with others to submit comments in opposition before December 10th.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrew Cheyne with the California Association of Food Banks. And in addition to my work with the association and with the Alliance, I also wear the hat as co-chair of the Legislative Committee for Californians for SSI, a coalition of more than 200 groups who has led a multi-year effort to try and achieve several objectives to end poverty and food insecurity amongst the more than a million Californians receiving SSI and SSP. And there were significant victories in this year's state budget, although the work is far from over. And so I'm happy to have this opportunity to speak a little bit about it, and also to tell folks about upcoming opportunities to learn even more, because there are just simply so many moving pieces to this. And I've never felt like 1 year could go so quickly, but the budget passage in July seems like a long time ago, are going into effect July 1st, and here we are, nearing November, and things are rapidly happening. And so I'm glad to have this chance today. So I'm referring to 4 pieces that were in the same bill that Tracey just referenced, AB 1811, specifically sections 38 through 41. And so I do want to take a moment to just celebrate the fact that we have achieved a historic end to SSI Cash Out. So I think everyone knows, but just very briefly, since 1974, we have had a policy called SSI Cash Out, which means that those who are receiving SSI and SSP in California are categorically ineligible for CalFresh, and that instead $10 was quote unquote cashed in to the cash aid benefit level, so that folks didn't have to apply for both programs. And what was a well-intentioned policy around administrative savings and ease for consumers in 1974 has meant that this $10 has never been indexed for inflation, and yet the categorical exclusion on food assistance has remained, leading to severe inequities. But the difficulty in unwinding the program is that there is a small but very important subset of this population that lives in what's commonly known as a mixed status household. So there are some CalFresh eligible household members and also someone or multiple people receiving SSI and SSP. And it's those households that actually are expected to receive fewer or even a total loss in their CalFresh benefits. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's just important background about why it took so long. And I want to thank the legislature. I want to thank the department. I want to thank the hundreds and hundreds of advocates, particularly the recipients who are living in poverty, are living with hunger, and made so many trips up to the Capitol. But it was the coming together of those stories, of that passion, and a real willingness to get this done by our state administration and legislature to make it a priority. And so here we are. So I want to make sure that everyone understands a couple of things. First of all, the policy just is not in effect now, and it will not take effect until next summer. And unfortunately, I don't have an exact date to give everyone, but it will be sometime between June 1st, 2019 and August 1st, 2019. And as soon as we have that date, we will let folks know. But what's important is that no one is encouraged to go to their county and apply for CalFresh today, because the restriction is still in place, and we certainly don't want anyone making that trip and disrupting their life, and we also don't want to burden the counties at this point. But we do want to get a hold of folks, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit. This is an important opportunity to spread the word. This means that in next summer, the exclusion will be listed, and SSI, SSP recipients, so even folks who are just receiving SSP, which is a small category, will no longer be denied CalFresh. I also want to emphasize that there will be no change to SSI and SSP benefits. So there's no loss in the $10. The SSP program is not ending. There are unfortunately, some really bad myths out there. And so there's no change to SSI, SSP benefits. As a result of this, there are only changes on food assistance side. So among this population, as I mentioned, it's a little over 1 million people in California. It's about 500,000 households are estimated to be newly eligible. And that's the vast majority, about 3/4 of the population who experiences a change. But like I said earlier, there are some households that already have non-SSI SSP members in them who are currently receiving CalFresh. And there is about 45,000 households like this who actually will experience an increase by bringing in the SSI SSP member. And those of you who know the CalFresh rules know that, as your household goes up, you're eligible potentially for a greater amount of benefits, but it depends on your overall household composition. And so it's too much to go into on this webinar. Like I say, we're about to tell you about a separate webinar just on this topic. But when you bring in that person, who's living on the SSI SSP grant, it is, several $100s, which is still below the poverty threshold, but it may be enough to affect your CalFresh eligibility. That bringing in that person might also trigger some different CalFresh rules, particularly around what's known as the elderly and disabled rules. So there's about 45,000 households, again, who are expected to see greater CalFresh, but there's about 73,000 households who are expected to see a partial loss in their CalFresh monthly benefit. And so those households will then become eligible for the supplemental nutrition benefit. That's supposed to be SNB, excuse me. So that's going to be a very important piece for those of us who are on this call who do CalFresh policy or CalFresh application assistance to make sure that gets implemented properly, because those households, won't become any wealthier on paper, but simply because of the change in eligibility will lose part of their CalFresh. And it's very important that they stay connected to CalFresh, because that is going to be the way in which they will maintain their eligibility for the supplemental nutrition benefit. And then there's about 7,000 households who are estimated to lose their CalFresh entirely. And they will become eligible for the transitional nutrition benefit, which is meant to offset and will now provide a state-funded nutrition benefit on the EBT card, but they will no longer have a CalFresh case. And so again, it's very few cases statewide. And in your county, that might actually, get down to a very small number of households. And so it's hard to know exactly who they'll be in advance. And it will be potentially hard to stay a hold of them even after this goes into effect. And so if for those of you who want more information about this, please start to get a hold of me. And again, we're about to tell you about a webinar in December that's going to go in even greater depth. But these are the kind of categories of state-funded nutrition benefits. They're often called hold harmless, but these are the official titles: supplemental for partial loss and transitional nutrition benefit for those who experience a total loss. There are two other important changes, however. The CAPI grant, the cash assistance program for immigrants who provide monthly cash benefits to elderly, blind, or non-citizens with disabilities who became ineligible for SSI SSP solely due to their immigration status as part of the 1996 welfare reform. Have never been impacted by cash out. So they've always been eligible for CalFresh, but now they will receive, as a matter of parity, a grant increase of $10 a month. So those grants will actually come up $10 a month to have parity with SSI SSP grants. And finally, cash out is also ended for the food distribution program on Indian reservations. So this means that SSI recipients who are not receiving SNAP can participate in the FDPIR program. But the federal exclusion, for those of you who work in this program, the federal exclusion on FDPIR and SNAP or CalFresh remains in effect. So those programs cannot be accessed simultaneously, but those who are receiving SSI or SSP will now be able to participate in FDPIR. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps ahead of next summer? So we have a county advocates checklist and wanting folks to have a heads up on what's happening. So right now, the most action is happening at the state level. So there are some advisory groups, there are some statewide meetings happening, organized into outreach and also customer experience. So who are the right outreach partners needed to get the word out and help folks be able to apply? And then once folks apply, to maximize the customer experience, again, it was expected to be about 500,000 newly eligible households, so a very large population moving on to the program now. And we want to get as many folks on as possible, and we also want that to be the most successful process for, again, a population that is going to have a lot of barriers, poverty and hunger, the transportation, the disability access, and also on the county side, this is going to be a huge influx. And so we're intensely working with them in the state right now. But soon, the focus is going to be shared between the state and county as those advisory groups come to some priorities and start to set out, some basics about how to best implement this policy. Then we'll be looking for the county advocates working in partnership with state advocates and the state agency and the county agencies then to begin implementation as we all work together toward this summer 2019 deadline. And so that looks like at least a couple of things. First of all, it looks like working to maximize local implementation. So like I said, the state customer experience group is still working, but it's clear that an access priority is telephone applications. We've learned and listened to clients as well as advocates who already represent those receiving SSI, SSP, working with the Social Security Administration. And it's just obvious that given some of those transportation and other barriers, how important the telephone is and how used to folks, used to using a telephone this population is. But also in-person accommodation. So for those who are going to go into the county office, wanting to make sure that all of the in-person accommodations required under ADA and as best practices to serve Californians in needs are being met. And so there's much more to come on the specific details about those, but just to flag some of those. And we're also wanting to be working with our state and county administrators. I know that there's some webinars being planned, and I think we'll all have a lot more work to do to really make sure that we're all refreshing on the rules that are going to apply, the CalFresh rules that are going to apply for this population. So those that are receiving SSI or SSP become categorically eligible for SNAP. This doesn't confer automatic eligibility, but it does deem, without additional verifications, several important pieces such as resources, gross and net income, social security number, sponsored immigration information, and residency. There also are particular eligibility rules around what's called the elderly and disabled rules in SNAP and CalFresh that are very important to the population, including the uncapped excess shelter deduction, the ability to claim excess medical expenses, or if not that, using our standard medical deduction, potentially using the elderly and simplified application process if that is available to the household, and several other pieces. Again, we're going to go over this in more detail in December, but that local implementation is going to be very important. We expect approximately 1/3 of the newly eligible population to be in Los Angeles, and then several other counties, also a substantial newly eligible populations like San Diego, San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange, Santa Clara, Sacramento, typically the big population counties And again, our focus will be statewide, but obviously with both particular emphasis on the counties that are likely to see the biggest influx. So obviously that was a lot, and I couldn't help but already begin to reference that we're going to have a dedicated conversation about this. So here is where you can get more information. There'll be a webinar on December 11th at 10 a.m. I also encourage you to go to the Coalition's website, ca4ssi.org with the number 4. There's also an SSI Google group that you can join. That I'm about to give you my email where you can email me to sign up. And then I want to shout out to the CDSS's Cash Out homepage. They have a great hub full of resources that has the all-county letters. It has slides from previous meetings. It has information and updates about future meetings. And so I strongly encourage those looking for more information, please go there. And as you have questions, you can always reach out to me as well. So we can go to the next slide. So here is where you can register for that webinar and get more information about it. And you can certainly see how to get a hold of me. Again, if you want more information, if you want to get on the Google group, if you have questions about what's going on, I'd be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Great. So thank you to our presenters for sharing all of that information. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some of the questions that have been coming in. There's one here, which maybe Tracey can answer about the conversation around public charge, looking for clarity around how it will be a test that looks forward, not backwards. So just asking to clarify that. And also mentioning challenges around talking to immigration lawyers who advise clients out of an abundance of caution not to apply for benefits sometimes, and making sure that families are being advised to ask the appropriate questions of their immigration lawyers about that. So Tracey, do you want to take that one?
Sure. And I will give you the best information that I can, but I will say that part of the problem has been that it is quite confusing. So by being a forward-facing test, the test is to estimate whether an individual will be dependent on the government. And like I said, at this point, it would be, CalWorks, SSI, and institutionalization. In the future, with these categories around Medi-Cal and CalFresh, it would be looking at the use of benefits within a 36-month period that cannot start until it has been a minimum of 60 days beyond when the rule is published. And then there's also time in the future because there are times at which the retroactive look at benefits cannot be counted against their future dependency for 36 months after the rule is published. So basically the shortest answer that I've heard is that there is no look at a use of benefits within 36 months plus 60 days from when the rule becomes final. Because that is so confusing, it does not make anyone feel more comfortable to explain that. And I agree that there is a challenge with legal services, oftentimes providing people with the most risk-averse advice specific to their green card application. So immigration lawyers are generally tasked to think about the immigration question alone and not the totality of need. So there are many attorneys who will give the most risk-averse advice, even if it is not legally entirely the most accurate or perhaps in a family's best interest when looking at the totality of the family. There are CDSS-funded legal services, and the department is doing their best to get accurate communication back and forth. If we can do some follow-up from this webinar, I will send out those resources so that people can ideally be directing any families with concerns to legal services who have the best and most accurate information from the department as well.
Thanks, Tracey. And there's actually another follow-up question around what your advice would be for CalFresh enrollment staff who are encountering folks who are expressing this concern, and how to sort of track or gather those stories in a way that will be useful for advocacy.
Sure. So In terms of enrollment and recommendations, I think the number one bottom line is that this is all a proposed rule. Nothing has changed right now. We do not want people without legal background giving legal advice to families. So your best bet is to direct them to resources, but to emphasize that this is not a current rule change. But again, like I said, you do not want to overstep into giving legal advice that you may not be qualified for. And so therefore, those simple messages of no rules have changed. There is no change to the law yet, and that current enrollment and benefits cannot be used against them, even if the rule becomes published. People will, this time is just a proposal and it cannot be counted in that look at benefits for the forward facing. I would not give any advice beyond that as you're enrolling families. And what was the second part of the question?
Just how to gather stories about the possible impact that outreach staff might be seeing if they encounter folks who are.
Okay, great. Yes, so there, as I said, if you go to the protectingimmigrantfamilies.org website, there is a story collection portal. We really are trying to encourage people who do work directly with communities to provide those stories. It can be extremely risky and scary for families themselves to be reporting these stories. So, be very mindful in terms of not providing any identifying information that could potentially put people at risk. But the protectingimmigrantfamilies.org portal does have a story collection link on it. You can always also, if folks have not become a part of the California Protecting Immigrant Family Coalition, the California Immigrant Policy Center has been the main convener of that here in the state. I think everyone on this call is also a part of that coalition, CFPA, Western Center, and the California Association of Food Banks. So you can always contact us directly if you have specific stories or clients. We have been routing a lot of stories to different media pieces for the resources, again, with people's permission and with their names not given. And so feel free to contact any of us directly if you're not finding what you are looking for on that website.
Great, thanks, Tracey. I just have one more here that's come in about SSI, kind of a technical question around whether folks who receive the $80 or so a month on their SSI benefit for the restaurant meal allowance will still get that part of their SSI should they apply for CalFresh. So Andrew, maybe you'd like to take that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And no SSI SSP benefits will be affected by the end of cash out. There are totally separate and different programs. So earlier, Jessica was speaking about the restaurant meals program in CalFresh. So this is separate. This is a restaurant meals edition. I think it's called the RMA, and I'm sorry, I've just become familiar with this recently. So I'm happy to provide more information in follow-up that we provide. But this is a supplement that's given on SSI SSP grants, and it's due to your SSI SSP eligibility. Similarly around your living situation and your access to cooking facilities, but it will not be affected by the end of SSI Cash Out.
This is Jess. I would just also add that everybody who's added into the CalFresh program as a result of the SSI Cash Out will be entitled to use their EBT CalFresh benefits at a participating restaurant. Even if they're not in a county that accepts and participates in the restaurant meal program, their EBT card will be coded as restaurant meal eligible. And so if they live close to a border of a county that does participate, or they travel to a place where they do participate, they're able to use that EBT card because they are people who are disabled. So just a reminder, and I believe that there'll be additional restaurant meal program outreach to this population that will be newly eligible for CalFresh.
Okay, great. One more question about back to public charge. Can you clarify who as an immigrant would be eligible for CalFresh and subject to the public charge consideration? So just asking for clarity on who exactly and in what circumstance they could be eligible for CalFresh and potentially be subject to public charge rule.
Sure. So there are, again, without giving you wrong information, there are different visa classifications of people who are here on lawful but temporary visas, who have CFAP is for people who are before the 5-year mark who are lawfully present, and the CFAP being the California Food Assistance Program. The proposed rule right now does not include state-funded benefits. However, there are still a lot of legal things to understand in terms of whether I think CFAP would not be considered an issue under public charge, but that has not been finally determined, so I don't want to give you that information as well. But there are people who are lawfully present but have not gotten a green card yet. Also, I think the other major thing that has become a chilling factor are folks who are looking to sponsor family members who are still living abroad or who are here on temporary visas to be their sponsor for a green card. So there are both implications for the person themselves who is on CalFresh if they have not yet obtained a green card, but there are also implications if they are hoping to sponsor a family member, even if they themselves have citizenship. So I think we are hearing different concerns from different people when they are looking at the rule and how it pertains to them. And so I don't know quite enough about the different visa categories to know which specific ones might be here past the 5-year mark and on CalFresh but have not yet transitioned to a green card. But the sponsorship issue has been a primary one in many communities.
Great, thanks. I don't see any other comments coming in, so if those of you who have lingering questions want to type them in now, we still have a little bit of time left at the end of our webinar, so go ahead and send in your questions.
This is Jennifer. I have a couple of questions. I'm wondering about from Jessica, the CalFresh modernization bill. Does that require that counties start using text messaging, or is it going to just give guidance for counties if they want to adopt text messaging as part of their communication with participants?
That's a good question, Jennifer. The only thing that it requires is the Department of Social Services to issue guidance as to how to set up a text messaging, what kinds of things can be included in a text message, what can't, and kind of the parameters of federal consumer law related to text messaging, and the rights of people who are disabled to have messages and technological communication that is appropriate for them and accommodating to them. And that's all. That's all it does. It just directs the department to do this. And the reason that we think that this is necessary is because for people who've been around for a while, you might have remembered how long how long we had the conversation about electronic signatures and telephonic signatures, and the lack of guidance from the state, we believe, slowed down the progress of adopting those technologies, because it's, without kind of very specific permission, sometimes people at the county administering agencies can be timid to try new forms of communication. So that's all it does. It just directs the department to put out what are the rules regarding text messaging, and it does put in some standards for what those rules should look like.
Thank you. I also had a question for Andrew regarding telephone access for SSI recipients. Can you say anything about, the ideal model that advocates and SSI recipients have been talking about in terms of, ideally what would be in place in a county for people to apply, for SSI recipients to be able to apply over the phone?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I think those of you, who've been on the Alliance webinars in the past know that telephonic access is actually a long-standing priority for the Alliance. and for CalFresh advocates. And there's been legislation in the past, there's been administrative discussions, and a lot of counties have taken up this option, but that uptake has primarily centered around recertification and SAR 7, understanding that can have a great impact to reduce workflow, to reduce churn, and really improve county business process operations during that portion of the program. But with the end of SSI Cash Out, we now have this unprecedented population that's newly eligible, and so the focus is really on intake, and so new applications. And so the ideal process that we're envisioning is the ability to have electronic signature over the phone during the application process. Ideally, the county is either able to directly handle the calls or are using a call center that's going to offer full service, what we're calling end-to-end or one-touch resolution. So that folks aren't calling and on hold for long periods of time, are calling and able to, really get all of the work that they need done. Again, the vast majority of this population that's newly eligible, much of their information will already be deemed verified due to their receipt of SSI SSP, and so we're hoping to leverage that and other features to really focus on the few pieces of information that do need to be verified. And process these applications as accurately and as quickly as possible. And then another feature that's been an important priority for the Alliance that we think has real relevance here is the ability to have flexible interview scheduling. So in situations where more than one touch is required over the phone, those options for the client to be able to either initiate the callback themselves or have a block of time. Again, there's several different ways in which counties have implemented this, and I know the Alliance is hoping to get out a publication just in a few days about this. So again, there's more than one way that can look on the ground, but having those features at application we think are vital to making this a success both for our counties and for our newly eligible clients.
Thanks, Andrew.
Great. So no other questions have come through. So Jen, I think we can wrap it up a couple minutes early.
That's great. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the webinar. Thank you for sending in your great questions. There'll definitely be more information coming out about these, the variety of legislation that was passed over this last month, and especially at the beginning of the year as CDSS begins issuing ACLs and documentation about implementation. And as the public charge conversation moves forward, we hope you will continue to find non-federally funded opportunities to participate in your own free time, or for other people in your organization who are not federally funded to participate in advocating against the public charge changes. And again, December 11th, we will be going over the SSI Cash Out Reversal in much more detail. So please be sure to sign up for that webinar and have your questions ready. And with that, thank you again to our presenters and participants, and we will talk to you soon at our next webinar.